Today, we're going to be discussing the importance of ambassador partnerships within the influencer marketing space and how they can be the key to long-term impact. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Alice, Senior Social Media Manager at Favela. And my role is overseeing a number of our client accounts, as well as managing the influencer campaigns and the partnerships. So some of those brands include Brittany Ferries, The Entertainer, Organics, just to name a few. And so I could talk about the subject all day, but seeing as we only have 30 minutes, what we'll try and do is have a quick overview of the evolution of influencer marketing, then look at sort of the current challenges faced within those more traditional ways of working, then looking at how ambassador partnerships could be the solution to those challenges, how to implement it, and then we'll have a bit of a 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. But feel free to pop your questions in the chat throughout, and then we'll get to them at the end. So it wouldn't be a webinar without a bit of an icebreaker to start with. So get your fingers on the emojis. Thumbs up if you've purchased a product after seeing it being promoted by an influencer before. Or raise your hand, but I won't pick on you, don't worry. Got a few. Okay. Let me know in the chat the roguest thing you purchased as a result of influencer marketing. I think mine was something like maybe like eye masks during a late night scroll. Somebody else's perfume, which she'd never smelled. Great influencer marketing from them. And a bat hair clip. Okay, some great answers. Perfect. Great. Okay, well, let's get started on some stats to warm you up. So the influencer marketing industry is expected to actually reach $8.37 billion in value at the end of this year, and that's up from 35% last year. So that really gives you a sense of how important and how much this industry is growing. And so we've really come a long way over the last 15 years. If you think we've started with those in 2005 to 2015, those YouTube influencers who became the platform's biggest stars, creating those viral videos, really relatable vlogs, almost creating their own cult following on the platform, leading to some of the first brand deals, business ventures in around that time. So the likes of Zoella here, Joe Sugg, Naomi Smart, Daniel Howell, all who are still hugely popular today. And then we saw with the introduction of Instagram around 2011, 12, that many of those YouTube stars moved onto the platform, but it also provided an opportunity for those who weren't video first to rise to the top on Instagram. So we saw sort of reality stars, celebrities, other influencers really paving their way on the platform. And again, that's where those brand deals came in. I think the biggest influential people at that time were probably the Kardashians at that time, really leading the way for everyone else. But then towards the end, towards sort of 2019, start of 2020, Instagram almost seemed quite saturated with those sort of over-polished content and loads of brand deals, and audiences almost craved something new and something a bit more relatable, something a lot more entertaining, especially as we were in the midst of COVID. People almost wanted an escape when it came to social media. And that's where TikTok really came in and really delivered that for audiences. And what we've seen then over the last 5 years on TikTok has been now a move from the early adopters of TikTok, so your sort of GK Barry, Addison Rae, Charli D'Amelio, to more smaller creators who almost feel like friends on the feed, becoming as, if not more, influential than some of those bigger stars. And actually, today, those smaller influencers can achieve much higher engagement than the mega influencer as well. So on Instagram, some data found that nano influencers achieve an average of around 3.8% engagement rate, whereas those mega influencers, it's less than half of that at 1.2. And then it's a similar story on TikTok, where those nano influencers achieve an average of 143% engagement rate, whereas the mega influencers, so those with about 1 million followers, only achieve 4.5, which is still a great engagement rate, but if you compare it to those 143, it speaks for itself. So as we sort of spoke about briefly, that influencers marketing has changed over the last 10 years, and generally it's maturing as an industry. And this recent IPA study that was featured in the Drum just a couple of weeks ago now really highlighted the importance of influencers as their own brand channel, rather than just a subset of performance media. And what it showed is that influencers help to build the brand through that storytelling and through resonance, rather than just through sales. And it also found that creators actually deliver comparable short-term return on investment to TV. And it also found it achieved the strongest long-term brand effects than any other channel. So I appreciate the graph's quite small, but the top one is influencers creators. So if the data, and so what we can see really is that if the data is saying that creators help to build the brands, then the job of influencer marketers, or just marketers as a whole, needs to change, and it needs to look at them as more of a long-term brand building opportunity, and then therefore the payback would multiply for us. And so what's also worth thinking about is that, as we've seen, algorithms have really changed in the last few years to be a lot more personalized. They're algorithm driven, therefore actually content needs to resonate and relate to people in order for it to show up on their feed. It's not just about, you know, who can be the loudest on there. It's more about who can co-create in the most meaningful way. And equally, I think consumers have become a lot more savvy when it comes to content and social media marketing. You know, they really are expecting that amongst all the content they're consuming, if you want it to grab their attention, it needs to be relatable, it needs to entertain them. They can also really sniff out that false strategic alignment a mile off, and they definitely won't be afraid to comment that and turn off from maybe their favorite influencer. And I think this is a really great example of resonance rather than reach with Grace Beverley for Hugo Boss. So those of you who don't know, Grace Beverley is the founder of loungewear brand Tala. And what she talks about a lot online is being a female founder, entrepreneurship, how to be productive. So this partnership with Hugo Boss, talking about, you know, wearing clothes that make you feel good and show up in male-dominated spaces, felt like a really good strategic alignment. And within all the comments, people were saying how this was a great fit for her and how they really felt like it spoke to them as well. So even if it didn't have mass reach, it actually did reach the right people. And so there are a few current challenges within the more traditional influencer marketing, such as those one-off campaigns, as well as those one-off campaigns. It's hard to move the needle with just one campaign and one message. As we said, feeds are so busy and so saturated, to be able to stand out and make an impact is a lot harder. Also, there's a lot of more declining trust of influencers as a whole from consumers. They really want authenticity, and as we sort of touched on, they can see when there's not an alignment there, and they can see when something is just a cash grab. Equally, those one-off campaigns or one-off posts have a lot more higher cost around them in terms of finding that influencer, managing them, the workflows with them, and then therefore it really lowers the return on investment of those one-off posts. And then finally, also really, it's quite hard to predict what the performance is going to be of those posts, and plan for the long term. When it comes to comparing different influencers, there's so many variables there. It's hard to know what to do better next time, or to know what went wrong, or what can be improved. Whereas if we look at a long-term partner solution, the benefits of that outweigh, which we'll get onto. So a long-term brand ambassadors could look like influencers of all sizes. So we sort of spoke about, it could be nano influencers, it could be more micro and mid, such as Bronte King here, or it could also be community advocates. So people that have a much smaller following, but they're really dedicated to the brand, and they spread sort of word of mouth online and offline as well. They are people who have really great brand values and align with your brand, and therefore have a lot more relevance to the audience that you're talking to. And they also tend to be people that are a lot more authentic, a lot more relatable, and able to tell really great stories online, and stories that your brand wants to get across. So here are just a few examples of what these long-term brand ambassadors could look like, because they can be quite different. So first of all, here we have Royal Caribbean that have royal partners. So these are people that love the brand, travel on the cruise ships regularly, and share their travels with their community. And I thought this was a really great example of something a little bit different than a usual travel creator. This person shares a lot of videography and photography, so they're reaching that audience that way. And then we also have Rafai, which are a beauty brand that are really community driven. So everything, they don't really look at big influencers as much. Instead, they work with their community. And here they actually took their community on a trip, rather than the more traditional influencer trips. And then we also have Whoop, who have brand ambassadors, and they work with brand ambassadors who are into sort of fitness, sport, performance, and like to share that online with their community to show how Whoop is part of that. So lots of different ways that you can work with brand ambassadors on the long term. So the benefits to it, as we sort of discussed, really do outweigh the challenges that are faced with the more single influencer campaign. So it's, again, back to that trust and resonance when it comes to a long-term ambassador. If someone is talking about the brand multiple times, that's going to build more trust. They're also able to, as they're doing it multiple times, that repetition means that the message has more attention and really gets across to the right people. They're also able to tell a much more in-depth story, which provides that value and entertainment to the viewer, but also for a brand, it really gets the message across in a much more interesting way. There's also the piece about efficiency. So working with someone regularly, you don't need to brief them brief them each month. They've already got the products, perhaps they've got ideas themselves, and therefore it helps that longevity of the brand story. And then also advocacy. So not only are they online talking to their community and as a brand partner regularly featuring it, but also in real life. So that could be with their friends and family, or just simply sort of wearing the product or recommending it. But there's also the opportunity for them to attend events and community incentives as your brand ambassador. And then how can we also talk about influence marketing without mentioning the opportunities with paid? So this is another really interesting piece by System 1 recently, which found that those creator slash influencer-led ads actually achieve the highest average attention when compared to brand social native ads or TV cut downs. And they found they got 7.5%. And that's that graph in the middle, if you can just see it. And they found that why these ads work a lot better than the other forms of TV and brand social natives is that they have that human element within advertising that audiences really crave. So they feel like they really fit within the feed of what else they're consuming. They also build that trust, they build that credibility with the audience. They are able to reinforce the message through repetitions. And then also they're able to do that test and learn. So if an ad is really performing very well, you could maybe do it again with that same influencer or just tweak it slightly. And it feels like it's a cohesive story rather than starting all over again. So we thought that it would be great if we could talk about a long-term influencer that we've been working with for organics. So this is Rab, and he is a dad with 2 children, sort of just outside of London, one of which is a toddler who is organics' target audience. And his wife, Katie, is also an influencer in her own right with a really substantial following. And we've been working with him from the start of the year now. And throughout that time, he's attended Glowworm Festival, which organics were at, and they were sharing their new products, Gruffalo bars. You can see him there. Also, because we've been basically working with him throughout the year, naturally, the products have appeared in him and his wife's other vlog content. So you can see here that this is Katie sharing a vlog of them traveling with kids, and there's organics without us actually having to work with her separately. And then we've also been able to really jump on trends quickly. So this was the narrator trend back in May, and Rab was able to really execute this quickly. So we were really relevant when it comes to trends, and the audience absolutely loved it. And so the objective of working with Rab was to build that authenticity and relatable connections with real parents, and to do that with the consistent creator storytelling. So really inserting organics into a real parent's life. And by working with him 6 months, we were able to also have him within the paid media plan. We were able to have that organic product placement. He was also able to try some of the new products straight away and create some content around that, as well as attending the events like Glowworm. And the outcome has been strengthening the brand trust and the visibility among parent audiences. But also in terms of numbers, organic views have been over 200,000, and total paid impressions 8.2 million, which, as we saw from the System 1, shows that that is the most, the creator ads are what's driving the most brand recognition there. So when it comes to how to implement it, there are different styles of long-term partnerships. We have the regular influencers regular brand ambassadors posting monthly. You could also have affiliate programs. Maybe there's also opportunity for gifted experiences if the experience itself is worth a higher value. But some of the tips and tricks that we have at Favla are to start by identifying the type and the size of influencer you want. So whether it is that community influencer, or maybe it's someone slightly larger, think about what platform you want them on. Is it TikTok? Is that where your audience are? Or is it somewhere more like YouTube, where they can do a bit of a longer story piece? Also want someone who really aligns with brand values. So if you're a brand that is sustainability is really important to you, you want to work with someone who also has that same value, not someone who is perhaps also doing partnerships with fast fashion brands, for example. You then want to brief them, but let them create. So give them the guidelines and give them sort of what the goal is of the content, but then let them fill that in with the way that they feel best, because that will really shine through in when the content's created. And there might be ideas that you hadn't even come up with yourself in terms of the visuals there. Make sure you're aligned on the goals and the audience. Almost treat them as if they are an extension of the team. So if they know that the goal is to get engagements, they will feed that into what the content is. And if they know that it is within their audience, it's a certain type of person, maybe they'll talk a little bit differently, especially in terms of the messaging. Also, to set those expectations clearly. I think we know what a brand ambassador and a long-term ambassador is, but they might not. So when are you expecting content? When are you expecting it to go live? How long will it be for? You know, let people in and treat them sort of, like I said, like part of a team. You can incentivize them long term. So that could be the affiliate links, but it could also just be by making them feel like this could be an ongoing thing, or maybe there's bigger projects that they can be involved in. Creating a bit of a community, exclusivity with them, sharing the insights and KPIs, I think is really, really important. And we've seen that with RAB and organics. Sort of recognizing when content maybe hasn't done as well as the previous and discussing what you think went wrong there and what could be improved, which is a lot easier to do with someone long term than starting from scratch with a new influencer each time. And then also gather feedback, whether that's feedback on the product or service, whether it's on the ways of working, or maybe some audience insights that they might have. They're a really great boots on the ground person to have, so definitely utilize that. And it also brings them in and makes them feel like they want to do a much better job for you as well. So hope I haven't whizzed through that too quickly, and you've sort of come away with some useful bits of information. But I think, you know, the most important thing is that those effective partnerships aren't just about the quick wins anymore, or just the surface level exposure. They're actually about building resonance with people, building consistency, and also that authentic brand alignment. And I'm conscious of where this is just paused on, so for context, this is a guy who started working with Gymshark in the early days, and he is now such a long-standing brand ambassador. He's actually created collaborations with them, and sort of posts almost daily Gymshark. You would almost think he was the founder himself, but his content does so well, and it's a really great example of that long-term partnership. So I hope you've been popping in questions throughout, but if not, please do now, and I'll try and answer a few in the sort of 5 to 6 minutes that we have. Perfect, thanks guys. So I won't read out your rogue things that you bought from an influencer. I'll answer Anne's first about AI, because I haven't touched on that at all yet. So Anne asked, with the rise of AI, generated content and virtual influencers, how do you see the influencer landscape evolving in the next few years? I think actually that we've seen the industry grow and evolve, and now have like lots of multiple different types of influencers. So those content creators, celeb. So I actually think we'll see another category as well. So those AI influencers will be almost their own category, and they'll serve a purpose there. They won't maybe be able to do, you know, I don't know how the trust will be with people. At the moment, AI isn't trusted, but it could change. I think if you wanted an influencer just to show a human in situation, or show sort of a new product being used by someone or on someone, I could see why an AI influencer would be really beneficial for that. But I'm not so sure if you had an AI parent telling you that, you know, their child loved an organics product. I don't know how many of the audience would actually believe that, and therefore I don't think it'd be that effective. Got here. Melanie asking about, I'm aware creators will have different rate cards, but what should we expect for an average cost for 3 to 4 videos a month as part of a collaboration? I'm going to be really annoying with my answer and say it really depends what the brand is and what you're offering there. I think, you know, if, for example, you're offering a trip along with it, then it can be a lot lower. But if the value of the product is smaller, it depends. And also it really depends on the size and the type of content you're wanting them to create. If it's something quite high budget, obviously it's going to be a bit higher. I would say though, if you are looking at doing a more long-term partnership, that's where the opportunity for negotiation is, because people want that steady stream of income. So if you're able to say it's going to be around 6 months, I think you've got room to negotiate down. And then Sophia has asked about the future nano micro. I think it will become very popular, and then maybe we'll move on to something else. I think there is still a space for those celebrity brand ambassadors. If I think of Lewis Hamilton for Lululemon, you know, it aligns with that brand because it's a little bit more of a higher end brand. But I think the way that they do it is they also work with lots of different tiers. So I think actually, depending on what you're trying to achieve, what your brand values are, working with a few different types is a good way of getting the message across to a wider audience. And then Sophie's asked, what is the best way to source and find the most suitable influencer for your campaign? With Favla. But probably actually, it can depend on the size. If you're just looking for one, maybe you can do your own just manual search. You know, look at who is tagging you in content, or who is commenting. Maybe there's someone who really wants to get involved with the brand and they obviously already like the brand. But if it's a bit of a wider campaign and you need multiple and you want to evaluate their audience insights and their engagement rate, there's lots of different platforms you can use for that. That can sort of give you a big wider level, and then you can reach out to them on sort of mass. But Sophie, I can share a few of them with you after the webinar if you want. Any more with 1 minute to go? Let's have a look. I'll answer Steph as the final one for now, but any others I can shoot over via email. Would you recommend always working with an influencer on a one-off project before locking them in as an ambassador? I think so, from personal experience, or unless you've seen them maybe work with other brands on a long-term basis. I think it's a good way to sort of see what kind of creative they do and then look at the performance. I think from a higher level, if you're needing that to be signed off, then you're probably going to want to have something to base it on. So having that one-off post first is probably the best way to do that. Hopefully that answers your question. Great, perfect. Okay, well, like I said, guys, if there's any more, you can email us or DM us on our Instagram or TikTok, and we're happy to answer. Thanks so much for attending. Have a great afternoon. Bye.